Hello, welcome to the CoPC podcast. We are today with Edwin Rutsch from the Center for Building a Culture of Empathy. We are talking about the empathy circles that they have developed. We will see how this method can be used for conflict transformation. We will compare it to a more classical mediation process. We talk about the philosophical grounding, the work of Carl Rogers, a little bit about Lederach, about Galtung, other experts. We have practical examples on how they applied it for instance, for the Occupy Wallstreet movement and some conflicts that arose around those demonstrations, about community police dialogues, right-wing, left-wing dialogues. So very interesting things. So how actually to get people hugging after a hard conflict and even aggressive behavior. Very interesting discussion, very funny discussion actually with Edwin. I liked it a lot. And let's see how to develop this further and how actually you can become a facilitator for empathy circles. Hello, hi Edwin.
Hi Pascal, good to see you.
Good to
talk
see
with you. Thanks for the invite.
Thanks for being here. Good to see you. So it's late night on your side, very early morning on my side. Probably the sun will rise at some point during the interview. We'll see how long it takes. Happy to be here with you for the CoPC podcast. So it's a podcast on conflict transformation, peace building, and security issues. And our main objective is to promote interesting people, interesting ideas that somehow connect our community on LinkedIn or elsewhere. Today we are with you, Edwin Rutsch. You're director of the Center for Peace Building, director of the Center for Building a Culture of Empathy. And you're working on empathy and transforming conflicts for many, many years. You're an expert on empathy in particular. And yeah, I'm very happy to have you here and to discuss a little bit about your work, what you do, some practical examples. And you have a very special invitation at the end for the community.
Yeah, stay tuned. We have an invitation for you, both you and I.
Exactly. Good. Yeah, first, I always ask the interviewees who they are. We want to know with whom we're talking. So who is Edwin Rutsch?
Well, I'm, like you said, director of the Center for Building a Culture of Empathy. I've been working for about the past 15 years, on the topic of empathy. I had done a lot of traveling in my youth, after going to school here in California. I said, I'm going to learn by doing. So I just started traveling around the world, spent 10 years traveling and studying my way around the world, and got into the high-tech computer field after that. And then wanted to make some
you were a
documentaries.
programmer or what? You were a programmer?
I was system administrator, so I set up computer networks and did all the back office kind of stuff, but my heart was really in the seeking. As a traveler, I'd been seeking, traveling the world, working my way around, doing odd jobs and, all kinds of different countries, Asia, Europe, China, Russia, Southeast Asia. I was an extra in Apocalypse Now, the movie Apocalypse Now.
Yeah.
I was a soldier in the background. So
you played.
I would play the soldier. Yeah, and I
was
there.
Wow.
I sat at the table with Francis Coppola and Martin Sheen and Robert Duvall.
Now I'm impressed. Okay.
Yeah, I was traveling in the Philippines. They were hiring anyone kind of off the streets that was American, to play an American soldier. So, I just did kind of like odd jobs just all over the world. And I had that sort of a seeker, mentality. Yeah.
The seeker. Okay, I was going to ask, how does this go together? The strive for empathy and peace and playing a soldier.
Well, kind of, you asked who I am, so I'm going to give the overview.
Yeah, sure.
Big overview. And so, yeah, it was sort of being that seeker, but so I was in the technology field and I still want to do something about human values. So I started making some documentaries about projects, topics like inspiration, or trust and fear. And I came across the topic of empathy. And, the more I dug into that, I said, wow, this is really what I learned in all that traveling. When I was seeking, that's kind of what I was searching for, is how do we connect with people all over the world, coming from a very conservative background, my religion, all that kind of disappeared. And I just started seeing people are people everywhere in the world. There's that common humanity. And it's the empathy that kind of helps us to connect with that common humanity. And I said, I'm dedicating the rest of my life to this topic, and I've been working on it.
Religion disappeared, if that's not too personal, but you say religion disappeared, there's a connection with empathy or not? Or that's just
not really. I think religions can be very empathic. There's a lot of care, concern for the well-being of it's more this I grew when I was, my religion for me was like, I'm saved, I know the answers to life, I've got it all together, and that kind of disappeared. Like, I just I'm not a know-it-all. I don't know it all, and
so you're, how you call this, there's a word for that, people who don't know, they're not non-believers nor believers, or maybe I find the word, but there's a specific word for that.
It's not agnostic. It's like
it is agnostic.
Like,
it's agnostic.
Yeah, it's like, I would say babist. Like, when you're born, are you an agnostic? When you're born, you're a baby in the cradle. Are you agnostic? It's like you don't really think about it. So
right. Good point. So what was the most amazing experience from all your travels? I don't know, something particular experience with people you kept in mind?
I would say it's the romantic relationships, having relationships, around the world, different personal romantic relationships. I think that was sort of the most meaningful and deep, so yeah. But it's I mean, besides that, it was the seeking part, to always be looking out, like, what's more, what's the meaning of life? What is, it's kind of like the Siddhartha, you're just kind of going from country to country, meeting people, searching, trying to understand what life is about, and trying to do it through working with people. Like, I was like a longshoreman in Hamburg, unloading the ships, for example. I was in New Zealand, I was a surveyor's assistant out in the outback, hundreds of miles from any settlement, doing surveying of a railroad out there, picking fruit or whatever. So it's just, meeting the people and being in all kinds of different environments.
So what's more important, seeking or finding?
Yeah, seeking or finding. The seeking is a lot of fun. The finding, like, I found like empathy, and it's like, that's even a lot of fun too. So I think they're both very enjoyable. It's like, if I hadn't done the seeking, I wouldn't have found, like, hey, this empathy is really important. This is really how I can contribute. So I think they're both important to have that. It's something that you found that you can share. So like the hero's journey, right? The hero goes out and searches, and they find something that they can bring back to their community. So it's both important. They work together in that sense.
So you worked in Hamburg, you said, no? In the harbor, and you told me before that you have German origins.
Yeah, my parents are from the eastern part of Germany, and in terms of the peace building, that you're talking about, in your work in the mediation, I think that had a big influence on me, because they came to the United States as refugees, had lost everything. On my father's side, he was in East Prussia, that's the first area the Russians came in. So they'd hidden my father. He was a, just young teenager at that age, and they'd hidden him in the barn, and the Russians came in and shot everybody in his family. And on the mother's side, it was, kind of all the women were raped, and he just heard all those stories. And
so
the family,
the real tough war traumas.
Big, it was pretty bad in that part of the, the Russians had it, I understand the Russians, they had it really hard, and everybody, it's a terrible situation. So I think it's that it's that trauma, that seeing, hey, what can we do to really keep that from happening again? And that's sort of, in my awareness and consciousness, that maybe that's something that spoke to me about empathy too. It's like how we bridge the divides between people and bring them together to really hear each other. Yeah.
Do you have still relations to Germany? There's some, I don't know, relatives or travels, or I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I'd lived there a couple of years. Went to school there at University of Hamburg and Berlin, Freie Universität Berlin.
Dann sprichst du Deutsch.
Ja, ich könnte Deutsch sprechen. Ich habe lange Zeit nicht Deutsch geredet. I haven't spoken for a while because you don't really need it here, except my parents, speak a little bit still,
Nice. And you're born in the US?
Ohio, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but live in California, San Francisco Bay Area near University of California, Berkeley now.
Nice place, apparently.
Yeah, I like it. Yeah.
Good. Yeah, maybe let's talk about the main topic today. We talk about the empathy circles for conflict transformation. Maybe before we start to see the method and some practical examples, what's the philosophical grounding? What is it based on?
Well, the basic core, I would say, is the work of Carl Rogers. So he spent, 30 years, 40 years really studying how to do effective therapy. And he sort of developed the active listening or empathic listening process and really sort of mapped out the process of why it works, how it works, and create a whole, perhaps almost a phenomenological, philosophy around it. And so, but he did it in a therapist client, right? It's like you have a therapist and they have a client and they have problems, and you offer this empathic listening to them. You don't give them advice. You don't, judge them. You just listen to them and really hear them to where they feel heard for an hour. And from that listening, they start hearing themselves and they come up with their own ideas for problem solving.
Sounds very much like mediation, except for the therapy part. We're not doing therapy in mediation, but all the rest is exactly mediation. Yeah.
Totally. It's the core of therapy. It's the core of just good relationships. And, I've also done, mediation training, and it's you as the mediator, you do empathic listening with one party, you do it with the other, and then you try to bring the sides together.
You don't suggest anything, ideas come from them.
Exactly.
So it's called, what is it called? The person-focused
person-centered approach.
Person-centered,
He's focusing on the person instead of sort of analysis or other kind of processes like that. It's really about listening at the core, being present. And that's what we do with the empathy circle. So the work we're doing is totally just building on Roger's work. And other people have done similar work in mediation. You're learning that. But what we're doing is creating the core practice that we do is bringing small groups together, 4 or 5 people, and doing mutual empathic listening. So one person speaks on the topic, they select who they're speaking to. I could speak to you. You would reflect back your understanding of what I say, just as like you would do in therapy or in mediation. And we were sort of practicing. It just goes around. Once I feel heard, you become the speaker. You select someone to speak to, and you get 2 hours. Usually, we go for 2 hours of sort of an empathy bath. So empathy sauna, empathy hot tub.
Okay. And so the person-centered approach by Carl Rogers, it's from what I saw, it's partly attitude, how you approach things, how you do your work, and also a technique, right, in how to phrase questions and so on. Is that right? Did I get that right?
Yeah, it's you'd asked previously, like, hey, is there a good book, and there's a book called A Way of Being by Carl Rogers, and within that is a chapter, and he calls it Empathic and Unappreciated Way of Being. And I think it's really a seminal paper, because he did it in the mid-70s. He brought together all of his sort of understanding of empathy and really put it into this one paper. And I can send you a link you could put into the description below. And there's a link to the article, the paper, as well as he gave the paper too. So it's a recording of him presenting it. So it's really great. It's within the therapeutic context, because that's where he worked in. But later in life, he started doing group work and used empathic listening. He started doing conflict mediation. So he was in South Africa, doing conflict mediation there. He was in Northern Ireland and other places. So he was starting to really sort of expand the mindset, that empathic way of being, and the skills. He had the mindset, the philosophy, as well as the the processes and tools and techniques. Yeah.
And which other influences? Other references?
Yeah, I think that's such a foundation. There's this whole Rogerian direction. There's other a whole bunch of tribes that sort of built on that. If you have nonviolent communication, you get
Marshall Rosenberg.
Marshall Rosenberg. You get Jean Gendlin with focusing. You get the Gottmans, I think it is. They did imago relationships. So they were doing mutual empathic listening within relationships, romantic relationships, couples. They were using it there. And I would say there's for in the mediation, just different. There's Dominic Barter, who has restorative circles, and his process is very much based on empathic listening. So those are some, and then like I was telling you, I've read those are all books on empathy, and I've interviewed most of the authors. So there's just a little bit of something from the whole spectrum of people who have explored the topic of empathy. But I find Rogers just so powerful, because he had not just the philosophical understanding, but he really had a process. He was really doing a process. So he was kind of living what he was talking about. It may be almost phenomenologically like, hey, I'm going to do this. I'm going to describe the landscape of what my experience is, versus it just being very, theoretical and, sort of detached from a real lived, experience of empathy and mediation and listening. And
definitely. I think there are many, philosophical approaches. Sorry, go ahead.
I was wondering, what is your philosophical approach? You'd mentioned Johan Galtung, that you'd worked with him.
Yeah, I did my MA, Master's in Peace Studies at Distance University in Hagen, which it's not offered anymore. I think they closed it some time ago. I did it when somewhere 2007, 8, something around those years. And the approach was, let's say, critical peace building, conflict transformation approach. So Galtung was a reference, Lederach. It was a relatively broad. We had some courses on international law as well. We had a practical training with Johan Galtung, actually, on more, let's say, mediation, but with his special approach called the transcend approach. What else? The history of peace building, so international relations. So it was relatively broad, but always with this, let's say, critical approach. So, and then now, of course, mediation. Mediation is in terms of how is it called? Dus von Wert, who wrote Homo Mediator, a very famous Swiss. It's like the philosophy of mediation. It's about the history, about the mindset, and so it's more the philosophical part of mediation. I mean, for me, it's mediation is a process. It's clearly defined, as we're going to talk about the empathic circles. It's also, as understood, a process also behind. So in mediation, we have it's a clear process. It's a tool set on how you ask questions and so on. So for there, I think Carl Rogers is a very useful reference as well. But then it's very much a mindset and attitude, you know, how you like be neutral. And, you know, I like very much the Lederach conflict transformation approach, where, you know, everything is in circles. Like you have a good moment, a bad moment, a good moment. It's just go on, you know, keep the process going. There is a bad moment, doesn't mean that the mediation crashes. It's just, you know, just go on. The good moment comes back. So very process focused, process oriented. So those are my references.
Yeah, and we talked about Johan Galtung, and he has a quote that I kind of in the mediation field. I just love this quote because it sort of really encapsulates. It's almost like a formula. And he says, I'm just going to read it here. By peace, we mean the capacity to transform conflicts with empathy, without violence, and creativity, a never-ending process. And I think, and I've seen him, he has kind of different versions of that quote, and I see it almost as a formula. But what gets left out that I see in the peace building or conflict mediation is the centrality of the empathy. It's a lot of times it's like a reason based, or I mean, there's empathy is, you know, a big part of it, but it's not as big of a part as I think it really could be. And, you know, really put the empathy, the listening, the, you know, the non-judgmental listening and the mutuality of it. It's, you know, Rogers was sort of a one-way listening, but the importance of the mutuality that, you know, I'm willing to listen to you, but will you listen to me too, right? It's like, can we make this a mutual? And that's what we try to do in mediation. You know, I'm willing to be the first listener. I'll listen to you, you know, and I'll listen to the other person, and, you know, I'll go back and forth, but then will you listen to me, and will you listen between each other too? So we start creating that empathic, you know, mutual listening sort of a way of being between us. Yeah.
And what's that? Because I read a little bit about Rogers just before our meeting now, and he's talking about congruence, right? Congruence being, but more individual, as I understand it. What's your projected being and what's your current being, or something like this? So,
well, he has a philosophy of, you know, what is good therapy basically, and he extends it, you know, what is just good way of being in general. And he extends his philosophy into schools, you know, into work, and, you know, he talks about, like, you know, schools aren't very empathic, you know, the way of being, but the core of his philosophy is just three values. It's empathy is one, congruence is other, and what is the other? Positive regard. And I think you can change those to be more common terms, like empathy. Congruence is just that you are who you your inner and outer are the same, which is like honesty, authenticity. So you could use honesty and authenticity instead of congruence, which I do because it's, you know, I think it's a clear term. And positive regard means that I see it as care, like, you know, I care about your well-being. And so those are the three terms that he's saying is, you know, is the core to sort of the therapeutic and even the broader philosophy, I'd say, his way of being.
So the positive regard, that's maybe another reference that's very important to me in terms of the philosophical approach of our work. And that makes me think about Rousseau, you know, about that the human is good, is corrupted by society. And I don't know if that fits with the positive regard from Rogers, but for me, it's a bit like what you said about the baby. So the baby is innocent, you know, and then over time, some people become less innocent in what they do in their lives. But I think it's not by nature. It's because we live the lives that we live, and we're surrounded sometimes big pressure, challenges, you know, I don't know, whatever, lack of perspectives, needs, and so on. That makes us maybe behaving in a way we shouldn't. And so is it our fault as individual or the societies? A little bit of both, probably.
Yeah.
But that's for me a strong belief that the human is good, and we have to try to bring out the good in the mediation or any other approach.
Yeah, and that leads to your positive regard, because if you have that vision and seeing that humanity from your past experiences, I'm sure you've experienced that. People maybe you didn't like very much, but you really got to know them and you started seeing, hey, you can see that deeper common humanity, and and that then you have a sense of care for them, and you sort of extrapolate that to the world, like, oh, if that's my sense too. I meet people all over the world. I kind of connect with them, so it's kind of like a universal, way of, if we can kind of get past, all those things you're talking about to sort of block that deeper quality. Yeah.
I had a mediation experience about the difficult situation where sexual violation was involved. And when I had an individual discussion with that person, man, and the violation is years ago, I don't know, more than 10 years, 15 years, something. And today this person has a daughter. This man has a daughter. She's just born when we met, like a little bit 1 year ago or something. And then when he told me that in the discussion, he said, now, I don't know, a few months ago, I became father. And I like automatically said, congratulations. He started crying. And he said, you may be the first guy who congratulates me for having a baby, and especially a daughter, because nobody believes I can be a good father. Yeah, I don't know. For me, it was just normal. I mean, why not to congratulate? I don't think that by definition it must be a bad thing. I believe in the good of the person. Yeah.
Yeah, imagine it makes you a good mediator, because you're there seeing the the humanity of each person you're working with. They're gonna imagine they have more trust. They're gonna pick that up and have more trust in
if I don't believe in the good of the person, I mean, I stop doing mediation. Otherwise, how can we get to a good solution for everybody if not both are capable to do good? So
yeah.
Yeah.
What I find, one thing I want to add to that is, even if I don't really like somebody, or there's some problems I have, I sort of trust empathy. I know that if I can hear them, with what to their satisfaction, and that they can hear me, and the dialogue can continue, that sort of the blocks, to seeing each other's humanity sort of start melting away. So I think that's in mediation, or everybody doesn't have to be in love with everybody else or see each other's, positive regard. They can kind of hate each other. But the empathy I see as the first step, that if they're at least willing to listen to each other, it's like that will grow over time. So I see empathy is sort of is more fundamental and more important, that if you can trust in that empathy, you'll be able to work through, the conflicts. So, yeah, even without the sense of care, even without care or positive regard.
Yeah. I think empathy is the condition as an entry point. I mean, first thing is probably agree to meet, then agree to listen to the other, and then from there somewhere the empathy can arise. Yeah, let's talk about the circles. So how does it work? So you bring people together, and then is there different phases, steps?
Yeah, it was like about 10 years ago, it was Occupy Wallstreet. You remember those days? So we had an occupation here in Berkeley. And so they were saying, 99 against 100%. And I thought, no, we got to see everybody's humanity. So I got this tent, and I call it the empathy tent. It's a big canopy tent. And I took it to Occupy Wallstreet, and it was 100% empathy tent.
So Occupy Wallstreet, like, it was initiated in New York, right?
New York, but it went all over the country. Yeah,
okay,
there was a
local.
local.
Okay, I see. Okay.
Yeah, there was a local encampment here in Berkeley. Like, there was a central park, and they just took over the whole park. We had a tent there, and we would do listening. We'd come, listen and try to do mediation and stuff like that. And we did the talking circle, work where you got a big circle, they pass the talking stick, but I found that it didn't work that well. And then I started thinking of, well, we need mutual empathic listening, it's like people just listening. And then I was starting to think of this idea of just maybe small groups, 4 or 5, using, turn taking, empathic listening. So you would learn empathic listening, you would feel heard, you would listen to other people, you'd build connection, and you'd be kind of spreading this skill. But then the police closed down the encampment, so I wasn't able to really test it out there. But then I did, online, started, got together with some other people, and we started, working, doing the empathy circles, kind of developing the practice. And so that's what we do now. That, as I was saying, you can go to empathycircle.com, and the instructions, so there are some videos, but there's one speaker, you select your listener, you speak, you pause, you get a reflection, active listening, you share some more. And the point is that you are heard to your satisfaction. Once you're heard, or you have the time limit is up, that the speaker becomes the listener becomes the new speaker. They select someone, they speak, and they get reflection. And it just goes around like that for the time, we have. I think 2 hours is a good amount to really get deep. And we have a topic, but then you can also speak about anything that's alive for you, that is energizing you. And so my vision for that was, we had Occupy, encampment, maybe 200, 300 people camped out there. And what I had wanted to do was that instead of having those big general assemblies, where everybody gets together and they make decisions, there's these speakers that go up there and one person speaks and everybody listens. I was thinking, what if we had empathy circles, and there's 200 people, and they divide into groups of 4, and they talk with each other, and then they speak for an hour or 2, and then they get up and they mix it up, and then they speak to somebody else for 2 hours, and then after 2 hours they would mix it up. So it'd be sort of this grassroots listening, everybody learning these empathy skills, and and there was huge conflict in those camps. Like the second day I was there was a knife fight. Somebody had the biggest Bowie knife, Bowie knife. They're these curved kind of knives, and he was trying to slash at this other guy who had a pipe and was swinging a pipe, and they were like in a fight. And so there was deep conflict there. And I thought, well, if everybody was, there's a lot of different factions and so forth, all kinds of drug issues, alcoholism, everything else, homelessness. So if they would have had this practice, that would have helped sort of from the bottom up, people listening. So that's become sort of the core practice that I'm really trying to use, spread, train people in the practice. And ever since then, we've taken this empathy tent and set it up in Berkeley and other places. And when Trump was elected, a lot of the right-wing groups would come to Berkeley to demonstrate for free speech, and then Antifa and the left would counter demonstrate. And there's knockdown, drag out, bloody, fights here in Berkeley. And we would take the empathy tent and try to offer to listen to both sides, and then bring the sides together to have facilitated empathy circle dialogues. And there's a documentary called Trump Phobia, What Both Sides Fear. And there's this, it ends with our empathy tent, just showing how we did, kind of mediate between the sides. And, the people would be hugging each other after, on one side of the street, they're screaming and yelling at each other. And like in the empathy tent, after about 40 minutes, they're like giving each other a hug, so.
So I guess that work is still needed these days. Are you continuing?
Because of COVID, I haven't gotten out on the street like we have. I'm kind of waiting for that to sort of die down. What I did instead is, I've been doing more online for training, and I ran for Congress.
People cannot hug online. That's
you
that's
can't.
Strong
that's true.
symbolically, right?
you miss that. That's powerful.
You can send some hearts or something. But,
yeah, little
okay.
pictures.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
so I've been doing other things. I ran for Congress as the empathy candidate here in our local district just about for the last 8 months, and I didn't win the primary. So
Next time.
yeah. So yeah, I'm thinking now we need like an Occupy empathy, that instead of Occupy Wall Street, we occupy empathy, and we take, get to the streets, occupy a space, and do empathy circles and empathy classes kind of in a public space, and maybe demand, if that's the word, that politicians sit down with us and have empathic dialogue.
So talking about that right wing, left wing, and so on, how do you see the situation currently in the US? It seems to be very high tensions, and I mean, I see that from outside, but you have a lot of media reports about tensions raising up, and I think such work as you're doing is more needed than ever. Maybe not than ever, but last decades at least. How do you see that? Is there a risk of more violence?
I think so. Yeah, I think things are getting worse. The conflict is kind of going deeper into the psyche. It's like the polarization is deeper. There are communities there's a Listen First coalitions. There's coalitions who are forming to counteract that and working towards it. So that's happening. But yeah, it does seem to be worse. And that's what we tried to do, is try to reach out to the different sides and kind of offer empathy circles. And I think the other thing is, in terms of your mediation or the mediation community, it seems to me that it needs to be like taught in the schools. Like it should be, that it needs to be the culture. It's really about a cultural shift to say listening, constructive dialogue, mediation skills, empathy skills.
Absolutely, yeah.
Are like taught from the get-go. And I've done empathy circles with 4 and 5 years, 6 years old kids, and they can already do it, and so I think that needs to be something that we can work on. We are working at that.
I think this is really extremely important. I have my daughters have some, I don't know if it's exactly how they do it, but sometimes they explain us, how they deal with conflicts among themselves, how they can shape the feeling of belonging, the group thinking, and so on. So they have the approach. I don't know exactly how it will work, we will see, but the effort is there to do things like this. Coming back to the empathy circles, so you talked a little bit about the process. You said that the listener becomes the speaker. So can anybody be, or how does it work? Is it like a predefined order, or can anybody who was listening speak up and then become the next speaker? And is it?
It's always, I'm the speaker, you're the listener. When I'm complete, you become the speaker and you select someone in the group.
It's always in couples.
Yeah, it's always in couples. There's always, there's a speaker, active listener, and 2 or 3 or 4 silent listeners. And so it's always couples in that way, but it shifts around so everybody gets a chance. And the idea is get at least 3 turns. Try to get everybody to have at least 3 turns in the or more.
The silent listeners, what's their role?
They just listen until it's until somebody selects them to be a active listener, and then they actively listen, and then it's their turn to speak, and they select a listener, an active listener.
Okay, and you select you don't know the other persons, as I understand, so you select just anybody, any of the listeners.
Yeah, it can be anyone that you want. We ask that you try to spread the attention around, but it's your choice, because to select who you want. But it can be people who really don't know each other coming together. It could be friends who've known each other for a long time, coming together.
Mm.
So it can be just anyone. The thing about this empathy
Okay, so,
circle
okay, because
practice,
you know somebody from your youth or whatever from the neighborhood, and you say, okay, now I would like to know what that person is saying. Okay, I designate you as a speaker.
yeah, you'd first, if you're the speaker, you would speak to them, they would reflect back, and then when
Right.
you're done, they get to talk about anything they want. They have to have the topic or whatever's alive for them.
That's a really strong tool. This is also, just yesterday I participated to an online workshop where a person was exposing a problem, and the listeners after the presentation, they were speaking among them. They were exchanging about how they see it, what they like, what they don't like, what the challenges are, and the presenter was only listening, not participating. And the group discussing, they were discussing among them. They were never addressing this presenter. So it's like if you were listening, a group of experts exchanging about your situation. I think really powerful in terms of awareness raising and so on.
Yeah, but it also kind of levels the playing field. So there could be someone with a lot of power, someone with little power,
Right.
But they both have to listen and reflect equally, and they get pretty equal turns to speak and be heard.
Right, that's a good point.
And I know
like,
we're talking about the schools. Is like, I know someone, it was in Canada, she had some students, and she said, oh, let me show you this listening process, empathy circle. But she just listened to each student could just speak, and she just reflected back, and then she reflected back, and then to the other student. So she was the listener, right? But then the students said, hey, we want to start learning how to listen too. So they were asking to become listeners. And then they started doing kind of more the, turn taking empathy circle practice. And then they said, hey, this is great. We're going to take it home to our families. So they can take it home and say, to their families at dinner or whatever, hey, we want to have an empathy circle where everybody kind of does it. So the idea is to spread it, widely as a practice. And the thing is you can learn the practice by observation. So I'm hoping Donald Trump and Joe Biden have an empathy circle, right? And if they were, instead of having a debate, they have an empathy circle, it's like millions of people would see how it worked. And I'd say, hey, we can.
Would you accept a facilitation task for that discussion?
Absolutely, I'd be thrilled. Yeah.
Probably
that was the first thing I did when I ran for Congress. I invited the other candidates to take part in an empathy circle. So,
oh, did they come?
Two of them did, two Democrats. The Republican wanted to come, but it was scheduling problem. And then the other person who's already in Congress didn't even reply.
Yeah, okay.
So unfortunately.
Interesting to take that home to the family, so I can actually improve our family councils to do an empathy circle family council.
Yeah, and we had talked about maybe holding one with your community, your conflict.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. We'll come to that. I just wanted to ask one more question. So are there any rules or preconditions for such a circle? You just invite both sides, or do they, I don't know.
Yeah,
just come as you are.
Come as you are. You can, it's not like, hey, speak from the heart, speak only this. It's like, say whatever you want, free speech. It's like there's no limits. And the person who's listening just reflects back, but you have to agree that you're going to listen to the other person when they speak back to you. And so it's just holding the process is the main thing. And it's a tightly structured process, so the process kind of can kind of be held, by the community, by the group.
What would you say in the speaking out? I think definitely has a healing impact on yourself, understanding the other, understanding yourself better, understanding the other. So in itself it's a kind of conflict transformation. How would you say the empathy circles? Is it more solution focused or more therapy focused?
I would say it's relationship focused. It's building constructive relationships for well-being. I try to take it out of the therapeutic, because therapeutic is sort of this professionalism.
Yeah.
And what we're trying to do is like, hey, this is human beings. This is just a tool we can use as human beings. And the main thing I think is that if you know that the other people in the group are going to listen to you and you don't have to compete to be heard, or you're going to be, that you're going to, that you can say whatever you want, but before they say their judgments, they're going to listen to you, So you're free to be judgmental, but before you're judgmental, you have to listen to the person to their satisfaction. So that kind of builds trust. I find it. I'm not going to agree with these people, maybe, but they're going to listen to me, and that really builds a lot of trust. That you're going to have a space to vent whatever, share your truth.
Do the facilitators intervene, such as a mediator, if there are, for instance, heavy accusations or, negative speech?
No.
Or no? Okay, so
no,
totally
it's like,
open.
You're a goddamn asshole. It's like, you got to reflect back. I'm hearing you say I'm a goddamn asshole. Is there more?
Give me more, give me more.
Not give me more. Is there more? Just go ahead. I'm listening. I'm listening. And then it might be the person, says that back to the other person, and they vent that frustration. But because they were able to vent that anger, it's like it just sort of disappears after a few rounds. It's like, it's like gone, it's like the room is cleared of that stressful energy.
It's out, it's gone, right?
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Oh, that's usually what we try to avoid in mediation. So words, that's the ones that you mentioned before, I could never accept in mediation. I mean, it happens, it can be said, but then you have to interfere, correct, and well, I mean, yeah, you would try to go deeper. So what's behind that? Where do those strong feelings come from? What is behind that? So try to explore. But normally it's against the rules, such kind of aggressive.
Yeah, it as a mediator, when it's your turn to listen, you don't give any advice, so you don't get extra time. You're just listening, holding the space. When it's your turn to speak, you can say, hey, I don't really like you talking that way. And the person, okay, I hear you say you don't like me talking that way,
So during the listening, you're not allowed to talk. You listen for how long?
Well, the speaker speaks and shares an idea or two, which is about 30 seconds, 45 seconds, and then you pause, and then the listener reflects back their understanding of what you say. The other part with this is it's really about creating a culture of empathy. So a lot of times mediation is, hey, here's this conflict. We're going to mediate the conflict and restore the status quo, or, some kind of a functioning, relationship functioning. But the empathy circle, it's in the concept or way of being of a culture that we want to be doing these empathy circles in the schools before you even start getting into, do it for personal support, do it for connection. And then when the conflict happens, you're going to head off a lot of the conflicts, like before they even happen, because, a conflict bubbles up, you're able to talk it through before it escalates. But once it escalates, you've already developed that trust in the process. Like, okay, we really got a big conflict here. We've already done empathy circles before, so we sort of trust the process. So it's really about, kind of spreading the practice in, throughout the culture.
Yeah, so I see it, and as I understand, it's very much focused on dialogue, obviously. Dialogue as being an open exchange without particular expectations, except for creating better relations, what you were saying. That's the idea behind, but thematically, there is no particular expectation. Whereas in mediation, of course, it's a form of dialogue, and we have dialogic moments, but like at the end, you need to get a solution. You come to mediation because you want a solution on a specific problem. You have a conflict on something, and the expectation is that that problem will be solved at the end. You don't have that so much. It's more about the relation, the exchange, the awareness raising, creating strong empathy. And I see, so that's maybe
as a starting point. We do have the restorative empathy circles. So the restorative, you're adding other layers to it. So, you do mediation where, people, are in a conflict, and I say, okay, I'm going to go listen to this first person, and I listen to them for an hour or whatever, just empathically, just active listening. I listen to the second person, the third person, the fourth person, and then bring people together for a dialogue, and then sort of lead them through. And then, then you need like 3 hours, 4 hours or something for more of a conflict oriented. Like naturally, when people start working through the conflict, they start and they feel like they have a sense of connection. You can almost see the next steps can automatically kind of start coming up. Well, how about we try this? How about we try this? And as a facilitator, you can sort of say, okay, there's enough connection here. Let's now come up with a program of what we're going to do, and kind of write down the list of steps. So it does, but it starts with the empathy circle. You can kind of build layers or steps towards that mediation, towards that outcome goal.
You first need the trust and the empathy before actually starting mediation in terms of focusing on a specific topic.
Yeah. And we need to spread it throughout the culture and kind of transform the culture so that empathy is a primary social cultural value. So we're kind of looking at cultural change, cultural values change. So
and never-ending process, as you mentioned before.
It's never ending.
And you were proposing actually a small step, or maybe a big one, who knows, in this never-ending process. So what's your proposal to the community?
Well, I was proposing that we actually hold an empathy cafe. So an empathy cafe is any number, from your conflict, peace, community, security community, that we have an open cafe. We set a date and time, and any number of people can come to it, and we'll have a topic to discuss, or it can be anything that's alive for you. If you have a conflict you're dealing with in your country, you can come and share that and be heard about it. And then, then we would, we have a large community of facilitators who can just kind of help hold the process. So we can, if we have, we can have 50, 60 people, then we would have, 20 facilitators or whatever, so there's like 4, maybe 5 people to a group. And then we would record it too. We can put it out there to the community, so the community can experience it. We've been talking now, but if you're doing it, it's different because you're really living it. So we want the experience of what's it like in an empathy circle, because that's where you really, it goes into your consciousness. And then, it'll be good for the community, start connecting with fellow community members, meet other mediators or people, in this field, so you can start developing relationships, and you're going to learn a practice that you can take home to your family, to your environment. So it seems like be a fun kind of a project, and glad to kind of help organize that.
Great idea, very nice proposal. Thank you very much. So we will do that. We'll exchange later on how to concretely organize that. We put the information and links in the description below, and put that, of course, to the community. The recording, just for those who might be afraid if they don't like sharing too much publicly, it can also be not recorded. I guess we'll see, depending on what people are sharing.
If you have like 20 groups, we just record 1 or 2, so you can be in a non-recorded group. We're not
those who agree. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Good. Yeah, we do that. We push that out and then see how people react, and start having this kind of discussions. Interesting. Good point. So they will participants will experience how it works in practice, such an empathic circle. They can learn for the specific situations, exchange, and so on. And somewhere on your website, I think I saw that you have trainings for facilitators. How does that work? If somebody likes it and says, okay, that's something I want to bring to my community, how can you do that?
Yeah, we have the empathy circles that we hold every week, so people can come to the empathy circles just to experience it. So you have to take part in at least 2 empathy circles, so you've had the experience. And then we have a facilitator training. It's 5 weeks. It just sort of helps you to learn the ins and outs. You can just, a lot of people, they can observe it, they can take part, and they know how to do it. But this is just going a little bit deeper. It's, 5 weeks. it's we have a, just a nominal $30 registration fee, and if you want to donate, more beyond that, that's up to you. So it's really by donation.
And that's
because
online?
we're really trying to spread the practice. Yeah.
That's online?
Online, yeah.
Okay.
We have one starting, actually. Today it's actually starting next week on the 24th, but the next one will be in probably in January on a Saturday.
Okay. Good. Yeah, feel free to share also on the community and the group, and we will share more specifically now based on this very kind invitation. Thanks again. What else? Anything else you want to mention? I don't know. You also did many interviews, the trainings we talked about, the center. I will put the link to the center. You have interviews with those all those books behind you.
Yeah.
I mean, with the
I was
books,
saying all
obviously,
those
with the
books are on
authors.
empathy, and if you go to cultureofempathy.com, there's hundreds of interviews with empathy experts, including Johan Galtung, who we talked about too. So it's really a central research, a resource for pretty much everything on empathy. So there's a link to the empathy circles. There's information about the empathy tent. There's the training info. All that is there. So yeah, that pretty much covers it. And it's a never-ending process, right? Glad to have more dialogues. Do these empathy cafes. We just can keep the dialogue going.
Okay, and do you hope to see you active in the situation in the US? That still remains complicated, as we can observe even from Europe, far away. But
yeah, how is it in France too? Like we have actually people in France from Extinction Rebellion doing empathy circles. So
okay. Yeah, okay, about that topic, the climate and the environmental challenges. Yeah, there is a lot to do. I think France is calmed down a little bit after the election. So during the elections, it was very hot, very emotional. But I think since now it's decided, it calmed down a little bit. But yeah, as any society, obviously there are conflicts. So do you have many groups in many countries? How does that work?
We have the process, and we just sort of spread it. We invite people just to take it and spread it farther. So
and sometimes you get feedbacks, and okay.
Yeah, we get feedback. It's been several hundred people who have done the training, and they're used doing it in their families, or they report back, I did it in my school. I keep hearing these stories, I did it here, did it there, and had this great effect. It's kind of helped my listening, helped my family, to kind of us to hear each other better, stuff like that. So
a lot of grassroots peace building that you're doing.
Didn't catch that.
A lot of grassroots peace building.
Grassroots, yeah, from those 700 up. Yeah. So, and the goal is we just teach every person in the world how to take part in and facilitate an empathy circle as sort of a first step. It's like this is like the most basic first step practice, and then there's all the other mediation skills you can start building off of that basic practice. It's going to give the tools for personal support, conflict mediation. If you're familiar with human-centered design, the design community uses for human-centered design, has empathy as the first step, saying if you design anything, you need to be able to empathize with the people you're designing for. Be aware of how what you're designing, how it's going to impact their felt experience, and design, in a way that's constructive for their experience is in a positive way. And so the design community uses, it's very central to that community too.
Yeah, I think there's a whole field in I don't know how you call this, architecture, or rather how you shape cities, how you plan cities or parts of cities in order to bring people together rather than isolating them. It's a form of, peace building, if you want to say so, but at least a form of social cohesion. And that's something we do strongly here in my region. And you have, for instance, we have the lakeside, Lake Geneva. And of course, the lakeside is a more expensive part, the part just really next to the lake. And so you have one new building with expensive apartments, and just next to it, there is a how you call this, supported housing, where funded housing for people who can't afford it, in order to assure the mixity, as we call it, to mix people from different classes, different ages, and so on. I think that's you can do a lot with that.
Yeah, so you design the community in a way that does it, and that's like structural, yeah.
Exactly.
The other thing that comes to mind is I watched one of your other interviews. I think it was with this person. He was doing conflict mediation, and was it Mali or
yeah.
So I've thought of those type of environments. It's like, oh, we're going to mediate the conflict, but if part of that mediation would be, hey, we want to teach mediation in the schools. Can we all agree we want to teach these mediation empathy skills in the schools, so that the culture is starting to learn those, and we can bring the different communities together and have some processes like empathy circles for dialoguing with each other.
Yeah, these are the interdependence gaps, defined by Lederach. The Lederach defined his peace-building gaps, and one of them is the interdependence gap, where you have the elite, the top level negotiating and then signing some agreement, having a nice picture, but at the bottom, nobody can feel the peace. There is no peace dividend.
Yeah.
And
can you bring the different, he laid out the different, he said there's 3 zones in Mali, right? And there's different communities. Can you have like empathy circles where you have a couple of people from each zone and they have these empathic dialogues, and it's an ongoing dialogue, and it
community peace building.
Yeah, community at the ground level, it's
and that's usually missing. That's the problem. That's the gap. That's usually missing.
Yeah.
So you have the elites negotiating, and the rest is forgotten. But the rest is actually experiencing peace or violence.
And that's what the empathy circle is. It's a tool for that gap. I think it's a simple process. Anybody can learn it. Anybody can do it. You can just set it up, and it's fairly easy process. Even like in Iran, you see and these different, like Belarus, when they were trying to overthrow the dictator there, is having, I'm sort of imagining empathy circles in those type of environments, where instead of being against the powers that be, you say we're for empathy, we're for dialogue, and the demonstration is sitting down and having dialogues, and then inviting the powers that be, the police or what have you, into a dialogue. Hey, we're here to have an empathy circle. We want to invite you into a dialogue. And I've done that here with the right wing. When the right wing came to Berkeley, we sat down, and this was like early in one of the demonstrations, said, oh, come to the circle. And the person said, came into the circle, and afterwards, and he felt really good. People were listening to him. We're all listening to each other. And he said, I'm ex-military, and if you guys ever need any help, I'm here to help you. If you need any protection, I'm here to protect you. So it's just if you bring the sides together to listen to each other, it just overcomes a lot of, the issues.
The setting makes it all. I mean, that's also we see in mediation, that the fact people don't talk.
Yeah.
They are in conflict, isolated, without exchange, without talking, without dialogue. And sometimes it's just enough to just put the topics on the table, and you see there is actually no conflict, or like, let's say the rooms of negotiation you have are overlapping enough that you can find an agreement. But since you're not talking, you don't see it.
Yeah, it's the not talking that is the problem, right? There's a block because people aren't seeing each other. So just the talking itself, it's just overcoming that. But having some tools, sometimes you can bring the people together. If they're just talking, it's like, you can do a lot, but then a conflict can happen, right? It's like like in one of the empathy tents, we went to a right-wing rally. It was in Berkeley, and then Berkeley, a woman from Berkeley came, and she said, I never get to talk to, conservatives. I said, oh, we have some right here. You want to have an empathy circle? I said, oh, okay. So we sat down, and this was a group of bikers, Harley Davidson motorbike cyclists, a group of maybe 100. and they come to Berkeley every year to protest against Berkeley because of the liberal city. And we set up a tent right there, and we were offering listening to them. Then anyway, we sat down with her, and they started talking with one other woman. You know, we're facilitating an empathy circle with them, you know, and keeping them in the process. One person would say something, and it would sort of trigger the other person, and they would want to respond, right? It's like, and then I said, no, wait a minute. We want to hear what you have to say, but just say back what you hear her say till she feels heard, and then you'll have a chance to feel heard. So I just kept the process going, and they started talking about gun control. And usually it's conservatives, like, no, gun control is the stereotype, but they really found a lot of common ground, you know, just by hearing each other. And they left too with hugs, you know, it was a big hug at the end of that circle too.
I think that's a very great conclusion for today's discussion. And we're going to put out the invitation for the empathy circle. Thanks, Edwin. It was a great discussion. You see, the sun is here now. Day has come on my side.
It's gotten lighter during the day. Yeah.
I don't know if that's thanks to our discussion or thanks to the fact that the sun was rising.
Hopefully, we've shed some light on the world's problems.
a little bit of both. Let's say a little bit of both. So, no, thank you very much.
Yeah, great pleasure talking to you, Pascal. Really, a lot of fun.
Same for me. We'll put that out in the coming days and then see directions. Feel free to comment, to react. I think you're also reachable on your website. There will be contact and so on. I guess you're open for any kind of questions or
very accessible
feedbacks. Perfect. Thanks, Edwin.
Okay, great.
Have a good time. Bye-bye. Thank you.